The answer past profound and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in billions of aeons. I now see it here to receive and uphold that I vow to fathom the declared true meaning, to liberate all beings, thus generate the supreme bodhicitta. Currently, we are studying Surangama Sutra, and we have finished talking about how the world manifested out of ignorance and the manifestation of the animate world, the inanimate world, as well as the karma and affliction, so the manifestation of the three aspects. We have already covered on the part of the manifestation of animate and inanimate world, which part of it are quite similar to that of the wish-fulfilling treasury, and part of it is not completely the same. I indeed feel that there are such profundity in this teaching, and I felt quite touched by the teaching as well. By studying the Surangama Sutra, the profundity of the meanings, let it be in terms of the theory or other aspects, could dispel all kinds of doubts through the studying of it, which is quite crucial. Now let's continue to talk about the continuum of karma and afflictions. Previously, we already talked about the continuum of the world and the sentient beings. Now we're going to talk about the continuum of the karma and afflictions, which, in another word, the continuum of the karmic connections or karmic conditions, which is quite crucial. As we studied earlier, and I would like to repeat this again, we need to be prepared for any kinds of situation. What kind of preparation is it that you may ask? I'm simply talking about, on one hand, you could prepare to stay here, let it be living here or dying here. You could prepare for that. On the other, I think you need to prepare to take the Dharma to the other parts of the world, or let it be your hometown or other places. This would be a great aspiration that you can make, and you need to think about that through the progress or through the time of propagating the Dharma. If you have a place for you to propagate the Dharma, that would be good. If not, even if you are making connection, helping people to make connections to the Dharma from your residence, then that would be good too. It is not necessary that we have to propagate the Dharma at our hometown. Wherever you have connections, you should go there and propagate the Dharma. If you have heard the story of the Zen master Mazu, he used to be a small merchant and selling little dusters at his hometown. And then later he went out to seek the study of Dharma. After quite a long period of time, he became this great master. And then he returned back to his hometown to propagate the Dharma teaching. That's what he wished, because at the time of propagating the Dharma, he was quite renowned for it, because he was a great master at that time. So there were lots of people who would go there and visit him. And people in his hometown thought that he is a genuine, noble and enlightened master, a great enlightened one. And then at that time, an old lady recognized that he used to sell small merchants at the hometown. And then he kept on telling everybody that, oh, this is the person who used to sell duster. So the Zen master said that, well, it would be the best for it would be the best for you not to return to your hometown, because if you were to return to your hometown, it is not going to be good for the path. The old lady beside the creek calls my old name, and then by calling the master's old name, the master no longer have the opportunity to propagate Dharma anymore, because the people at the hometown maybe would feel that I know this person, I know how this person used to be. If the people at your hometown knows about your history, which sometimes may not be that glorious, then it might be difficult for you to propagate Dharma at your hometown. But if you were to be very popular, well-known in a positive way, almost like a celebrity or being a prince and being quite powerful and authoritative at your hometown, then it might be good for you to propagate the Dharma at your hometown. So we need to be prepared in both ways, whichever way that would bring benefits to the sentient beings. For example, when you look at the Guru Ponzo Rinpoche, after studying for 5-6 years, he returned to his hometown and started to build the Dharma Center, and the Dharma would be able to be passed down one generation after another. So he was definitely a great example of being such a bright lamp of the Buddha Dharma. Though we may not know, though we cannot compare ourselves to Ponzo Rinpoche, but if we were to have any capacity to be like Khenpo's Khenmos or like the Dharma masters, though sometimes may not have lots of fame, but very good at giving Dharma teachings, then in that way, take your genuine heart and propagate the Surangama Sutra and other Dharma teachings to sentient beings. The Surangama Sutra was extremely important in Chinese Buddhism, and it used to be placed with great emphasis in the past. But now, when we look around, we can see that it's only a very few people who are studying it and who are teaching it. There are so many people in different monasteries, but compared to the past, we can see that not many people are investing their time in the studying and teaching of it, and don't even mention about abroad. How many people are studying and teaching the Surangama Sutra abroad nowadays, and how many people will be doing that in this few years, in the recent years, as well as 100 years later. Therefore, we definitely need to make the aspiration to shoulder such responsibility. And then the Buddha continued to say in the sutra, saying that Purna, thought and love become bound together so that people love each other and cannot bear to be apart. As a result, the world has seen an endless succession of birth and parents of children and grandchildren, and the basis of all of this is desire and greed. It is because of such kind of connection of thought and love, which would bond together. It is said that through love, everything would arise, and through aversion, everything would cease. For that reason, there is the birth and cessation or death, and then all kinds of aversion and attractions. For that reason, in this world, there is the succession of the parents, of the children, of the grandchildren, generations after generations. And for that reason, this kind of love, this kind of grasping is called the basis for all, is in fact this desire and greed. This is the basis. Out of all the greed, this is the greed that is most, out of all the afflictions, such greed and desire is the most severe. A family may start off from having only 2 brothers or 3 siblings, and then in the future generations it could then branch out into few hundreds of people. So this love could plant all kinds of seeds to the future generations. In Tibet, we say that if the children were to get ordained and become become monastic, that would be good because that eradicated the seed of samsara for this family. And the parents would be able to could rest in peace. But of course, the worldly beings elsewhere, they would consider that if a person were to get ordained and not have children, that is not filial piety. That is not good for the family line to continue. There are people who would, the worldly people would usually think in such a way. And then the Buddha continued to say that greed and love feed on one another until greed becomes insatiable. As a result, in the world, all the sentient beings born of egg, womb, moisture, and by transformation tend to devour one another for the nourishment of their bodies to the extent that their strength permits. And the basis for all of this is killing and greed. It is because there is such a kind of love, such kind of grasping, and with that, slowly it would nourish our body, and then it would continuously expand and not get satiated. In this way, all the sentient beings of the 4 types of birth, of the eggs, wombs, moisture, and transformation, I just remember that when we talked about the birth from moisture, where it talks about with the combination of moisture, it is that the moisture is the most important for such kind of birth. All the sentient beings, let it be of any types of birth, would devour each other or would devour one another for the nourishment of their bodies. The large ones would devour the smaller ones, and even sometimes the smaller ones would devour the large ones. For example, within the ocean, the large fish devour small fish, and sometimes the small fish would be able to devour the large ones. We are quite familiar with that whole continuum or that kind of system. In our world, because of love, begins from love, the birth and death and such kind of rotation would last for generations. Not only for human beings, but for animals, for celestial beings, for the Asuras, for the Nagas. Within the whole world, there is such a kind of a tendency of how the stronger ones would devour the weaker ones. Even the countries on this planet. For example, currently Russia is trying to devour Ukraine. However, with the intense resistance, both of the countries are currently suffering quite gravely in terms of their military losses as well as wealth losses and many different aspects. Of course, the reason for Russia not able to devour Ukraine, there are various kinds of reasons behind it, different causes and different conditions. After making observation of the situations that's happening around the world, we can definitely see that let it be large countries all the way to the most menial as little ants and little earthworms. There are such kind of connections between each groups that's connected through killing and greed. Through this kinds of thoughts of killing and greed, through this kind of action and behavior of devouring, which is also taking its basis in greed, because if you were to kill the other beings to eat the flesh, it is because you have greed for the flesh. When we studied Abhidharma, it also talks about at the time of killing sentient beings, such kind of aggression has greed in it. Without greed, you won't generate aggression. And then in the sutra it says that a person eats a sheep. The sheep dies and becomes a person, the person dies and becomes a sheep, and it goes on that way through the birth and more. Through death after death and birth after birth, they come back to eat one another. The evil karma becomes innate and exhausts the bounds of the future, and the basis for all of this is stealing and greed. If a person were to eat mutton, eat the sheep, and then after the sheep dies, they will become a person the next lifetime, and then would eat the person which turns into a sheep. So for birth and death, they continuously to go on like such. Not just sheep and human beings, of course, it is to all the human beings to all the beings that takes the birth in the four ways. The form beings, the beings with form, and the formless beings, the beings in the celestial realm. Altogether, there are the 10 types of beings. So all the sentient beings of the different categories, with their birth and death, with their continuous consumption of each other. I remember that I quoted this particular description in the writing of this miserable world, my writing on encouraging people to become vegetarian and stop eating flesh. So I quoted this particular part. I was still living behind the Lama's shrine hall. I had a little hut over there. That's where I wrote the book. Also, I quoted from a story from the sutra. I believe it's from the Sutra of Miscellaneous Treasures. It talks about a person at the time of killing a sheep, where the family didn't want to let him to kill the sheep. So he told the family that we need to make offering to the spirit of this large tree, and the best way to make the offering is to kill this sheep. And then after killing and made offering of the sheep to that tree and eating that sheep, they started making a pond and a temple over there and make offering over there every year. Later, this particular person died. After he died, his son also took up the tradition of killing sheep. And the sheep, and then the father, after he died, he became a sheep. At the time of the son was about to kill him, an arhat, through his miraculous power, saw it while he was begging for alms, and told the son about the connection between the whole story. And after knowing that, the son felt quite disheartened, and right away he took down the temple and stopped making offering over there. So there are so many stories of how people killing pigs and then later become pigs, and vice versa. Such kinds of devouring and revenging kept on going for generations and generations without an end. The evil karma becomes innate and exhausts the bounds of the future, and the basis for all of this is stealing and greed. So this kind of karma will continue to result in taking revengeous actions upon one another without any end until the karma gets exhausted. And this kind of karma is called stealing and greed. Why is it called stealing? It is because by robbing other people's life, this is considered as stealing. This stealing, the definition of stealing is that taking what is not permitted for you to take. By committing in such kind of action, taking whatever is not permitted for you to take. Sometimes that is announced. Sometimes the stealing happened rather in a secretive way. When it comes to life, there is no one, not even one sentient being, would like to offer their life to you. So under such situation, let it be by force or by any secretive way, to take the other's life is indeed a mistake of stealing, a misdeed of stealing. There is absolutely no sentient being would like to give their life to you. Doesn't matter how much money you would offer to them. They definitely don't want to do that. So under such kind of circumstances, if you were to forcefully or through any other means to take the life, then that is definitely stealing. For such reason, it is called stealing and greed. By now, we have covered the killing, stealing, and the sexual misconduct. There is no mentioning of lying here, but all of these are considered as desire. Previously, when we talked about the sexual misconduct or sexual intercourse, which is also part of greed, and we also talked about killing, which seems to be a misconduct of killing, but it is essentially also stealing. So the three root greed, that is killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct, which then fetters us inside of samsara and not able to get liberation from it. That is the very basic causes and conditions. In the sutra over here, the Buddha says that you owe me a life, I have to repay my debt to you. From these causes and conditions, we pass through hundreds of thousands of aeons in a sustained cycle of birth and death. Whenever you kill any other sentient beings, then they would definitely return and take revenge, and vice versa. Such kind of killing, such kind of debt of lives would last for hundreds of thousands of aeons, and the beings would suffer continuously in samsara. Such kind of suffering, especially when it comes to the stealing of life, which is most severe, which is avoided by the great masters of the past. Whenever we eat flesh, whenever we eat meat, that is directly connected to the life as well. That is why in many sutras, the Buddha talks about the downfalls of such. You love my mind, I adore your form. From these causes and conditions, we pass through hundreds of thousands of aeons in a sustained mutual entanglement. In this world, if you really like, for example, my mind, my mood, my characteristics, my personality, my kindness, whatsoever kind of mental characters that you adore, and then maybe you have really beautiful forms, so therefore I would grasp onto that. Though we have very different object of grasping, but such kind of grasping would also continuously to entangle both of us inside this samsara. Therefore, greed is indeed quite horrifying. According to the Sutra of Perfect Enlightenment, talks about all the sentient beings cannot attain the great liberation. The reason behind it is because of the greed, which would lead them to fall into the pattern of birth and death. So the sentient beings, out of greed, have fallen into the three lower realms. Also, according to the Sutra of Right Mindfulness, where it says that the human beings being fettered by love cannot then rid of life and death. Because of the love and greed would fetter one. For that reason, one cannot get out of the cycle of birth and death, cannot be unfettered. Let it be monastic or lay practitioners, we have such greed. We have such intensity of love and greed. If you were to truly renounce from this life, then it would be easy for you to eradicate the love and desire. Then it would be easy for you to attain liberation. Whenever or before the time you can eradicate love and desire, though you may appear to be a practitioner, but in your mind stream, you still have this poisonous serpent-like love and desire, which would harm you and would fetter you. You would have not even one moment of freedom, even under the circumstances that you know is not correct. You would still commit to that, which then would later lead you to fall into the three lower realms. At the beginning of the practice, many practitioners have such great aspiration, but because of the habitual tendency of greed and desire, the practitioner may not be able to keep observing the precepts and not able to do the right thing under circumstances, which then would lead them into the falling of the three lower realms, to take rebirth in the three lower realms. And sometimes it is because of the merit as well. Despite the strength of desire and greed, but knowing that they had already ordained, but because of the great merit that's accumulated from the past, then maybe their desire can be controlled. So let it be the desire to the other people or desire to wealth and other things. If one can control the desire and greed, then it would be easy for people to attain liberation. Wherever you are, the key is to tame your mind of greed and aggression. If you were to have greed and aggression, then it's not possible for you to succeed in practice. If the power of greed and aggression were to be faint in your mind stream in this way, though you may still have some ignorance and arrogance and jealousy, but the power is not going to be that strong. So whenever there is greed, then aggression would definitely come, would definitely show up, but you should definitely try your best to work with it and don't give up on that. In the sutra over here, it says the killing, stealing, and lust are themselves the basic roots. From these causes and conditions comes the continuity of karmic retribution. Such kind of continuity of contribution caused because of the continuity of causes and fruition. The previous one talks about the continuity of the sentient beings. And over here, this is the continuity of causes and fruition. And before, the sentient beings was on the consciousness and realms. So the teaching is very clear over here. What's the causes and conditions behind the animated and inanimate world, and the mind that is behind it. And can we use that mind onto the path of liberation? Can we use such kind of mind as causes and conditions to tread on the path? Is quite crucial. If the karma and affliction were to continuously to evolve and to lead you into the continuous rebirth into the samsara, then the inanimate world would also manifest because it correlates to one another, it works with one another. Without karma and without afflictions, there is no manifestation of sentient beings. The Buddha then said, therefore, Purna, the three kinds of upside-down continuity comes from the light which is added to enlightenment. So all of these false continuity comes from the light which is added to enlightenment. Over here, the light of enlightenment is explained by the great masters in different ways. Some think that this light is the cognizance, and in fact, the three continuity within nature of Tathagata, it is the luminosity. After such kind of luminous cognizance, one would slowly get to know the external phenomena, and then becomes the illusory false manifestation. Then such illusory false manifestation becomes the characteristics of karma, of changing, which is then corresponding to the three joys and six places that we've talked about earlier. Master Han Shan states that these three types of characteristics are all lights. They added lights. But if you were to explain it directly, it is really ignorance. It is the ignorance derived from such cognizance, and the bright mind directly produces such illusory false characteristics. The whole phenomena, the animate and inanimate world, according to the explanations of great masters, they're a bit different. With this false enlightenment of knowing nature, subjective awareness give rise to object appearances. Both are born of false view, and from this falseness, the mountains, the rivers, the great earth, and all conditioned appearances unfold themselves in succession that reoccurs in endless cycle. All of the phenomena world, the mountains, rivers, and everything, the animate and inanimate will continuously to recur. The birth, death, the arising and cessation, the formation, duration, degradation, and emptiness would continuously to appear and unfold. Let it be the animate or the inanimate world, this sentient beings world, the world of karma, continuously to rotate and then repeat itself, continuously to manifest and display in such a way. So the samsara indeed correlated to the three kinds of continuance that's stated previously. This description is very much similar to the wish-fulfilling treasury. At first, there's the formation of the inanimate world, and then the animate world, and then the suffering and happiness of the sentient beings are very much connected to their own karma. In this chapter where it talks about the suffering and the happiness, that is, according to the wish-fulfilling treasury, is very similar to what's been explained over here about the continuance of karma. So the teachings of Han Chinese, or the Chinese Buddhism and the Tibetan Buddhism, the sacred meaning, the profound meaning of the great master's teachings are very much connected, so we need to be able to see that. Purna over here said that if this wonderful enlightenment, this basic miraculous enlightened brightness, which is neither greater than nor less than the mind of the thus come one, abruptly bring forth the mountains, the rivers, and the great earth, and all conditioned appearances, it seems that Ananda is hiding and not asking any questions. I kind of miss him right now. Purna has been asking questions. Ananda maybe not able to ask questions. Where is Ananda? Why don't you come and ask a question? But maybe when Ananda asks a question, the answers are a bit more difficult to understand. So Purna's questions and answers are easier. And then Purna continued to ask that then now that the thus come one has attained the wonderful, empty, bright enlightenment, will the mountains, rivers, and the great earth and all the conditioned habitual outflows arise again? Purna over here says that, well, this mind, if the Tathagata's mind is without a decrease or increase, and we all share such wondrous awareness or this kind of wonderful, empty, bright enlightenment, which is neither increased nor decreased. In this way, since the Buddha has already attained this wonderful, empty, bright enlightenment, then all the mountains, rivers, and great earth, all the conditioned habitual outflows or the manifestation that's displayed because of the all-conditioned habitual outflows arise again. Since we share the same kind of awareness, the same kind of enlightenment to the thus come one, then how come we still see all of those manifestations? On top of that, the Buddha, the thus come one, you who already come to the highest level of realization, then all of those mountains, rivers, and ground are those kinds of impure outflows. All of the habitual tendencies, would they overcome and overpower you again? Now you are the Tathagata, but later are you going to have more afflictions and suffering? Are you going to suffer exactly like us? This is the question posed by Purna. And then the Buddha told him 4 examples to demonstrate. The Buddha said to Purna, consider the example, a person who has become confused in a village, mistaking south for north. Is this confusion the result of confusion or of awareness? The Buddha over here said that, well, let me give you some examples. Sometimes those examples are very important to clarify the answer for people who are confused. Over here, the Buddha said that, oh, there's a person who comes to this village and then all of a sudden lost a sense of direction. Initially, he wanted to go to south and then he thought it's north. I understand how that feels because when I used to herd the yaks, the mountains all look exactly the same, and sometimes when there are lots of fogs and mists, it's very difficult to differentiate the direction, and sometimes I would get lost. But when the sun came out, and then I would call all of the yaks, and then I realized that I had been far off. It happens nowadays to people who are driving cars as well. If you were to miss one sign on the road, you probably would drive off for a long period of time and then you have to drive back. This person, in the Buddha's example, saying that he confused the southbound for the northbound. Now let's relate this lost person to the question. Since you asked if the mind of the sentient beings share the same Tathagata with the Buddha or not, is it of one entity or of two entities, or is it increase or decrease? The Buddha didn't expound it from that aspect. Rather, he gave an illustration of an example by saying that if a person who got lost, he got lost to the wrong direction, then is this confusion the result of confusion or of awareness? If this is a question posed to you from the Buddha, how would you answer it? You can think about it. Let's look at how Purna answers it. Purna said, this person's confusion is the result neither of confusion nor of awareness. Why? This person, his confusion is the result neither of confusion nor of awareness. The reason is that confusion is fundamentally baseless. So how could it arise because of a confusion? Awareness does not produce confusion. So how could it arise because of awareness? Over here, Purna points out that the confusion itself doesn't have any root, doesn't have any true entity to exist, therefore you can't find it. Therefore, the confusion doesn't have, you cannot grasp on to confusion. So you cannot say that a confusion arises because of confusion, because it's baseless. His observation is rather quite profound. In the aspect, from the aspect of the mind, there is no confusion to start with. You got lost, and this so-called loss can be found. This loss could be because our eyes made some mistake, and it could be our consciousness, or at the time of looking for it, maybe we won't be able to find it. To further demonstrate it is that if we were to be lost because of the consciousness wrong, or because our eyes made a mistake, but when one were to seek for it, one won't be able to find. I remember that once I went to the zoo in Beijing, and I went there with Khenpo Lakshe and Khenpo Deba, also another one whose name is Barang. And then over there, we lost both Khenpo Lakshe and Barang, who were rather quite old. Khenpo Lakshe at that time was not that old. It was probably around 70 years of age. But then we couldn't find them. We were seeking for each other throughout the whole afternoon, and finally found them in the afternoon. We found them around the sunset time, and by the time of spotting them, we sort of hiding from the back and then making observation of what they were doing. When they saw us, they were rather a bit upset about us. They felt that we had abandoned them. And then Khenpo Deba also complained to them, saying that, well, if you were lost, you should have just stayed at where you were, and then we would have found you. So over here, this loss, this confusion, does the confusion arise from confusion, or does confusion arise from enlightenment, from being aware? And then the Buddha said that if a person who is aware points out the way to the person who is in the midst of confusion and makes him aware, then do you suppose, Purna, that once the person is over his confusion, he could lose his sense of direction again in that village? The Buddha said that, well, at the time of being lost, all of a sudden someone who knows the way points out to the right direction, then this person who's lost in the village, the Buddha asked Purna, saying that, what do you think, Purna? Do you think once the person is over his confusion, he could lose his sense of direction again in the village? After someone has already pointed out the correct way, pointed out the correct direction, then Purna, what do you think? Do you think this person would get lost again and then go back to the village and get round and round around the village? And then Purna, Venerable Purna, saying that, no, world-honored one, it is not possible. But nowadays, I can't guarantee that, because there are people who are really bad at directions, especially in Larungar. There are people who constantly get lost. But usually, someone with a normal sense of direction, once being guided to the correct direction, or knowing the correct direction of the way, then would not get lost again. So this is the first example. And then the Buddha gives the second example. Purna, the thus come one of the 10 directions are the same way. So the Buddhas are the same. In the past, there are obscurations, but later there are no more obscurations. Of course, this is from a certain aspect. It's speaking from a certain perspective. Because there is ultimately no obscurations to start with. And then the Buddha continued to say that confusion is groundless and ultimately empty in nature. There had basically been confusion. It merely seemed as if there were confusion and enlightenment. It appeared to have some kind of confusion. But it's quite easy to understand because at the moment of knowing that one is confused, this confusion would disappear. Therefore, you would be able to know that being aware is not producing confusion, because the true awareness is wisdom. Is just like the sun that could dispel the fog and clouds of confusion. Understanding in such a way, could your awareness again produce confusion? There is no way for it to further produce confusion again. To further elaborate that there is no possibility for confusion to arise again from awareness, the Buddha then continued to give the example by saying that it merely seemed as if they were confused and enlightenment. When the delusion about confusion and enlightenment is ended, enlightenment does not give rise to confusion. It is also like a person who has an eye ailment who sees flowers in space. If he gets rid of his eye ailment, the flowers in the space will disappear because there are no flowers in space at all. If he were to be so stupid as to quickly return to the spot where the flowers disappeared and wait for the flowers to reappear, would you consider that person to be stupid or smart? Is it the same stupid person who had the ailment of the eye ailment, or is it someone else? It doesn't really make it very specific. Anyhow, this person then returned to the same spot where he had seen flowers that appears in space when he had the eye ailment, hoping the flowers would reappear. Originally, since this person's eye ailment had been already cured by the doctors and after taking the medicine, and he doesn't see those illusory appearances anymore, and then he would go back. Would this person go back to wait at the same spot where he had seen the flowers in space or not? That is definitely a way to consider whether this person is stupid or smart. So that example points to that if you were to wait for the illusions to appear in the mind stream of the Buddha, that is not possible. That is definitely foolish. And the Buddha is probably pointing out that Purna is being quite foolish right now. Rather, the Buddha told a story. So he's saying that, well, if your eye ailment had already been cured, why would you stay at the same place and wait for the flowers to appear in space? And then Venerable Purna said that originally there weren't any flowers in space. It was through a falseness in the seeing that they were produced and extinguished. Now, initially, there is no flower in the space. It is because of the ailments of the eye. There is the delusional seeing. Therefore, there is the flower that appears in the space. And there's the birth and the death, or the arising and extinguish of the flower. At first, it looks really beautiful. But then after taking the eye medicine, after being cured from the eye ailment, then the flower would necessarily disappear. After seeing that it has already disappeared, if you were to think that, oh, there must be flowers in the space, and still looking for flowers in the space, waiting for such kind of flowers in the space is definitely false. To see the disappearance of the flowers in the space is already upside down. It's already false. To wait for them to reappear is sheer madness. If you were to wait for the flowers to appear, then that is just simply mad. Why bother to determine further if such person is stupid or smart? This kind of mad person is indeed foolish. There is no way this person is wise. Because there's no flower in the space to start with, and if you were to wait there and hoping that the flowers would appear, needless to say that this person must be mad and must be foolish. So, similarly, when you apply that same thinking process to the bodhisattvas, many people probably ask the same question. Since the mind stream of the Buddha has already eradicated all the afflictions, why doesn't afflictions appear in the Buddha's mind stream? It is just the same as the person who's completely cured from ailment. There is no more illusion. There is no more of those false appearances. And then the Buddha continued to say to Purna, saying that, since you explained it that way, why do you ask if the wonderful enlightenment, bright emptiness can once again give rise to mountains, the rivers, and the great earth? The Buddha said that, well, since you already know that the Buddha has already come to such kind of wonderful, enlightened, bright emptiness nature, then as the Buddha who had already attained such a perfect fruition and attained the wisdom of omniscience and wisdom of knowing the suchness of everything, would see the mountains and rivers and the great earth just like the mundane beings. Let me give you two more examples to further demonstrate my answer. It is like a piece of ore containing gold and a mixture of other metal. Once the pure gold is extracted, it will not become an ore again. After you extract gold out of ore, if you're familiar with mining and familiar with extracting gold, then you will know that at first the gold is mixed with rock or with other minerals. After all kinds of procedure of extract gold out of mineral, then you would get the pure gold or 99.99% gold. It's hard to get 100% gold, but you can get the pure gold as much as possible. If you were to put this pure piece of gold into the mountains, is this pure gold going to get mixed with the other rocks and dirt and start becoming ore again? It won't be like that. Similarly, the obscurations in the enlightened one's mind stream has already been eradicated. Therefore, there is no way for it to resurrect, for the obscurations to reappear, remanifest. That is why we would say that the arhats would not have afflictions same as the bodhisattvas, and definitely the same for the Buddhas, because their wisdom and their seeing of the nature is just like pure gold. Even if you were to put pure gold in the mountains, it is not going to become an ore. And then the next example the Buddha gives is that it is like wood that has been burnt into ashes. It will not become wood again. After you finish burning the wood, after the wood has already become ash, then how could it return to its state of being a piece of wood? That is not possible. Similarly, the Bodhi, the Nirvana of all the Buddhas, the thus come ones, are the same way. The bright enlightenment, the wonderful bright enlightened emptiness is exactly the same. The dualistic thoughts and conceptual thoughts are not going to arise again. So these are the 4 examples that demonstrates it. Later we will look further into it to further discuss the explanation through other commentaries. Let's stop here today.
Jirgana jiran lo jubai, juben zone droa droa jo.